In a busy neighborhood in San Francisco, there was a martial arts dojo that attracted people from all over the city. The dojo was known for its strict training and the high level of skill displayed by its students. Among them, Wei Zhang stood out as one of the most talented and confident fighters. Wei had been practicing martial arts since he was a child, and his skills were unmatched. He moved with precision, his kicks were fast, and his punches carried power. But what set him apart from others wasn't just his talent, it was his attitude. Wei believed he was better than everyone else, and he didn't hesitate to let people know it. Wei's confidence often bordered on arrogance. He would walk into the dojo every morning with his head held high, wearing expensive workout gear that made him look like a movie star. His fellow students admired his skills but found his behavior annoying. Wei loved to talk about how superior Chinese martial arts were compared to other styles. He would often mock boxing, wrestling, and even karate, saying they were outdated and ineffective. "Real fighters use kung fu," he would say with a smirk, folding his arms across his chest. "Everything else is just for show." One day, during a public exhibition match at the dojo, Wei decided to put on a performance that would leave everyone speechless. The event was crowded, with locals and tourists alike filling the seats to watch the demonstration. Wei performed a series of acrobatic moves, flipping through the air and landing perfectly balanced on one leg. The audience erupted into applause, and Wei soaked up the attention, bowing dramatically before stepping off the mat. As he walked past a group of spectators, he overheard them talking about someone named Chuck Norris. "Did you hear about Chuck Norris?" one man said to his friend. "He's like a legend in martial arts, 6-time world karate champion." Wei stopped in his tracks. Chuck Norris? The name sounded familiar, but only because he had seen some of his old action movies on TV. To Wei, Chuck Norris was nothing more than an actor who played tough guys in cheesy films. He couldn't believe anyone would take him seriously as a martial artist. "Chuck Norris?" Wei said loudly, interrupting the conversation. "You're joking, right? That guy's just a movie star. What does he know about real fighting?" The two men turned to look at Wei, surprised by his outburst. One of them, a tall man with short brown hair and a friendly smile, chuckled. "You'd be surprised," he said. "Chuck Norris isn't just an actor. He's one of the greatest martial artists of all time." Wei rolled his eyes. "Please. Karate is basic. It's all about rigid forms and stiff movements. You can't compare it to the fluidity and complexity of kung fu." He crossed his arms again, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "If I ever met this Chuck Norris, I'd show him what real martial arts look like." The man laughed, clearly amused by Wei's arrogance. "Well," he said, extending his hand, "my name's Eric Dawson. I'm a friend of Chuck's. If you're so sure of yourself, why don't you come meet him tomorrow? He's visiting a gym here in the city." Wei hesitated for a moment. He hadn't expected this conversation to go anywhere, but now he saw an opportunity to prove his point. "Fine," he said, shaking Eric's hand. "I'll be there. Let's see if this Chuck Norris is as great as you say he is." Eric smiled, knowingly. "You won't regret it," he said before walking away. Later that evening, Wei couldn't stop thinking about the challenge. He sat in his small apartment, scrolling through videos of Chuck Norris online. Most of what he found was footage from old movies or interviews where Chuck talked about his philosophy of martial arts. Wei scoffed at the clips, dismissing them as irrelevant. "This guy's ancient," he muttered to himself. "How could he possibly keep up with modern fighters?" Despite his doubts, Wei felt a flicker of excitement. This was his chance to prove once and for all that Chinese martial arts were superior. He spent hours practicing his techniques, perfecting every kick and punch. By the time he went to bed, he was certain that he would crush Chuck Norris in a sparring session. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Austin, Texas, Chuck Norris was preparing for his day as usual. At 65 years old, Chuck still maintained a rigorous training schedule. His home gym was modest but well-equipped, with mats covering the floor and punching bags hanging from the ceiling. Every morning he started with stretches to loosen his muscles, followed by a series of drills designed to improve speed and accuracy. Chuck's life revolved around discipline and respect, values he had learned during his decades in martial arts. He believed that true strength came not from overpowering others, but from mastering oneself. Over the years, he had earned countless titles and accolades, but none of them mattered to him as much as the lessons he had gained along the way. That evening, Chuck received a phone call from Eric. "Hey, Chuck," Eric said, getting straight to the point. "I ran into a young martial artist today who claims he could beat you in a fight. His name's Wei Jiang, and he's pretty full of himself." Chuck chuckled softly. "Sounds like he's got a lot to learn." "I told him to meet you at the gym tomorrow," Eric continued. "Thought it might be good for him to see what real martial arts are all about." Chuck thought for a moment. He wasn't particularly interested in proving himself to arrogant young fighters, but he understood the importance of teaching humility. "All right," he said finally. "Let's see what this kid's made of." The next morning, Wei woke up, early, determined to make a strong impression. He dressed carefully, choosing a sleek black uniform adorned with gold embroidery. As he drove to the gym, he rehearsed what he would say to Chuck Norris. He imagined himself delivering a flawless performance, leaving Chuck speechless and humbled. When Wei arrived, he was surprised to find the gym nearly empty. There were no crowds, no cameras, just a few mats laid out in the center of the room. Standing near the far wall was a man in a simple white gi. His hair was gray and his face carried the marks of age, but his posture was upright and commanding. Wei recognized him immediately. Chuck Norris. For a brief moment, Wei felt a pang of uncertainty. Chuck looked calm and composed, radiating an aura of quiet confidence. But Wei quickly shook off the feeling. "So, you're Chuck Norris," he said, walking over with a smug grin. "I expected someone bigger." Chuck raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond. Instead, he gestured toward the mats. "Shall we begin?" Wei nodded, stepping onto the mat with exaggerated flair. "Let me show you what real martial arts look like," he said, slipping into a fighting stance. As they faced each other, Wei couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. Something about Chuck's presence was unsettling, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Still, he pushed the thought aside and launched into his first attack, a spinning kick aimed at Chuck's head. To Wei's astonishment, Chuck dodged the kick effortlessly, moving with a speed and grace that defied his age. Before Wei could recover, Chuck countered with a swift strike to his shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. Wei regained his balance and tried again, this time aiming lower. But once again, Chuck anticipated his move, blocking the attack with ease. Round after round, Wei threw everything he had at Chuck, spins, jumps, combinations, but nothing seemed to work. Chuck's movements were precise and economical, each block and counter perfectly timed. Wei grew increasingly frustrated, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he struggled to keep up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chuck stepped back and lowered his guard. "That's enough," he said calmly. "You've got talent, but you're relying too much on flashy techniques. Martial arts isn't about showing off, it's about control." Wei stood there, panting and humiliated. For the first time in his life, he realized he had been wrong. Chuck Norris wasn't just a movie star, he was a master of his craft, and Wei had a lot to learn. As Chuck walked away, Wei sank to his knees, staring at the mat in silence. The lesson had been harsh, but it was one he wouldn't soon forget. The next few days were difficult for Wei. He couldn't stop thinking about the sparring session with Chuck Norris. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw himself failing, his flashy kicks missing their mark, his powerful punches being blocked effortlessly. It wasn't just the physical defeat that bothered him. It was the way Chuck had remained so calm and composed throughout the entire match. Wei had always prided himself on his confidence, but now he felt like a fraud. For the first time in his life, he questioned whether he truly understood martial arts. Wei tried to distract himself by training harder than ever before. He spent hours at the dojo, practicing his techniques over and over again. But no matter how much he improved, he couldn't shake the memory of Chuck's effortless movements. Wei began to notice flaws in his own fighting style, flaws he had never seen before. His kicks, though fast and flashy, left him off balance. His punches, though strong, lacked precision. Worst of all, he realized that he relied too much on showmanship, trying to impress others instead of focusing on the fundamentals. One evening, as Wei sat alone in the dojo after everyone else had left, he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see Eric Dawson standing in the doorway. Eric had been watching Wei closely since the match with Chuck, and he could tell that the young fighter was struggling. "You okay?" Eric asked, stepping inside. Wei hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know," he admitted, finally. "I thought I was good, but now, I'm not so sure." Eric nodded, sitting down beside him. "That's normal," he said. "When you meet someone like Chuck, it changes the way you see things. He's not just a fighter, he's a teacher. And sometimes the best lessons come from losing." Wei frowned. "But I didn't just lose. I got crushed, humiliated." "That's true," Eric agreed. "But you're still here, aren't you? You haven't given up. That says something." Wei didn't respond. He stared at the floor, lost in thought. Eric's words made sense, but they didn't make him feel any better. He wanted to be great, not just good enough to keep going. He wanted to prove that he belonged in the same league as Chuck Norris. "I want another chance," Wei said suddenly, looking up at Eric. "I need to face him again." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Last time didn't go so well." No," Wei replied quickly. "But I've been thinking about what he said, that martial arts isn't about showing off. Maybe I was wrong about everything. If I can learn from him, maybe I can become a better fighter. A real fighter." Eric studied Wei for a moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll talk to Chuck, but don't expect him to go easy on you this time." Wei smiled faintly. "I wouldn't want him to." A week later, Wei found himself driving to a small gym outside Austin, Texas. The journey had been long and tiring, but Wei barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing, proving to himself and to Chuck Norris that he could improve. When he arrived, he was surprised to find the gym even simpler than the one in San Francisco. There were no fancy machines or equipment, just a few mats and a punching bag hanging from the ceiling. Chuck was already there waiting for him. He stood near the center of the room, dressed in a plain white gi. His expression was calm, almost serene, as if he hadn't a care in the world. Wei took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Thank you for seeing me again," he said, bowing slightly. Chuck returned the bow. "You're welcome," he replied. "Eric told me you wanted to train with me. Is that right?" Wei nodded. "Yes. I've been thinking a lot about what happened last time. I realize now that I have a lot to learn. If you're willing, I'd like to train under you for a while at least." Chuck studied Wei carefully, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said. "But training isn't just about learning new moves. It's about changing the way you think. Are you ready for that?" Wei swallowed hard. "I am." "Good," Chuck said. "Then let's begin." Over the next several weeks, Wei immersed himself in Chuck's training regimen. It was unlike anything he had experienced before. Instead of flashy kicks and spins, Chuck focused on the basics: balance, footwork, and breathing. He taught Wei how to control his movements, emphasizing precision over speed and power over aggression. At first, Wei struggled. He was used to relying on his natural athleticism, but Chuck's methods required patience and discipline. One day, during a particularly grueling session, Wei grew frustrated. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to master a simple stepping technique. "Why is this so difficult?" he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. Chuck stopped and turned to face him. "Because you're trying too hard," he said. "Martial arts isn't about forcing things. It's about letting them happen naturally." Wei frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you have to trust yourself," Chuck explained. "Your body knows what to do. You just need to listen to it. Stop thinking so much and start feeling." Wei nodded slowly, trying to absorb the advice. It sounded simple enough, but putting it into practice was harder than he expected. Still, he kept at it, determined to get better. As the weeks passed, Wei began to notice subtle changes in his fighting style. His kicks became sharper and more controlled. His punches carried more weight without sacrificing accuracy. But the biggest change was in his mindset. He no longer cared about impressing others or proving himself. Instead, he focused on mastering each technique, no matter how basic it seemed. During this time, Wei also got to know Chuck better. Despite his reputation as a legendary fighter, Chuck was surprisingly humble and approachable. He spoke openly about his own struggles and failures, sharing stories from his early days in martial arts. Wei learned that Chuck had faced many challenges in his career, but he had always approached them with determination and respect. One evening, after a long day of training, Wei and Chuck sat together on the porch outside the gym. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. Wei felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything." Chuck smiled. "You're welcome," he replied. "But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Martial arts is a lifelong pursuit. There's always more to learn." Wei nodded. "I understand, and I'm ready." Chuck clapped him on the shoulder. "Good, because there's one more thing we need to do." "What's that?" Wei asked. "A demonstration," Chuck said. "For your friends back in San Francisco. Let's show them how far you've come." Wei grinned. "I'd like that." A month later, Wei returned to San Francisco accompanied by Chuck Norris. News of their upcoming demonstration had spread quickly, drawing a large crowd to the dojo. People packed into the stands, eager to see the young Chinese martial artist who had trained under a living legend. When Wei stepped onto the mat, he looked nothing like the arrogant fighter he had been before. His movements were fluid and confident, his demeanor calm and respectful. He performed a series of techniques, blending the fluidity of kung fu with the precision of karate. The audience watched in awe, erupting into applause when he finished. Afterward, Wei bowed deeply to Chuck, who stood nearby with a proud smile. "Thank you," Wei said, his voice filled with gratitude, "for teaching me what it means to be a true martial artist." Chuck returned the bow. "The honor is mine," he replied. "Remember, strength without humility is meaningless. Never forget that." Wei nodded, knowing he would carry those words with him for the rest of his life. After the demonstration at the dojo in San Francisco, Wei Jiang's life began to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. The event had drawn a lot of attention, not just from local martial arts enthusiasts, but also from people outside the community. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, Wei found himself being interviewed by reporters eager to learn more about his journey with Chuck Norris. One of those reporters was Laura Bennett, a young journalist known for her curiosity and knack for uncovering human interest stories. Laura had been assigned to cover the demonstration after hearing about the unlikely mentorship between Wei and Chuck. At first, she thought it would be a straightforward piece, a feel-good story about an arrogant young fighter learning humility from a legendary martial artist. But as she watched Wei perform on the mat that day, she realized there was something deeper going on. His movements were sharp yet controlled, confident yet humble. It was clear that this wasn't just a transformation in skill, it was a transformation of character. After the demonstration, Laura approached Wei with her notepad in hand. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" she said with a friendly smile. Wei hesitated for a moment, still catching his breath from the performance. He wasn't used to talking to reporters, but he nodded. "Sure," he said. "What do you want to know?" Laura started with simple questions: how he got into martial arts, what inspired him to train under Chuck Norris, and how the experience had changed him. As they talked, Wei opened up more than he expected. He told her about his early days at the dojo, his cocky attitude, and the humiliating sparring session that had forced him to rethink everything. "I thought I knew it all," he admitted. "But meeting Chuck showed me how much I didn't know." Laura listened intently, jotting down notes as Wei spoke. She could tell he was sincere, and his honesty made the story even more compelling. When she finished interviewing him, she turned her attention to Chuck Norris. Sitting quietly in a corner of the dojo, Chuck seemed content to let Wei take center stage, but Laura wanted to hear his perspective too. "Mr. Norris," she began, approaching him respectfully, "can I ask you a few questions about your time training Wei?" Chuck smiled warmly. "Of course," he said. "Ask away." Laura asked him about his philosophy of martial arts and why he had agreed to take Wei under his wing. Chuck's answers were thoughtful and insightful. "Martial arts is about more than fighting," he explained. "It's about discipline, respect, and understanding yourself. When Eric told me about Wei, I saw an opportunity to teach him those values. Everyone makes mistakes, but the important thing is learning from them." Laura left the dojo that day with pages of notes and a growing sense of excitement. She knew she had stumbled onto a story that went beyond sports or competition. It was about growth, humility, and the power of mentorship. Over the next few weeks, she continued following Wei and Chuck, conducting additional interviews and observing their interactions. She even traveled to Texas to visit Chuck's home gym, where she witnessed firsthand the dedication and simplicity that defined his approach to martial arts. As Laura worked on her article, Wei returned to his daily routine in San Francisco. Life at the dojo felt different now. Before, he had been the star student, confident, flashy, and sometimes overbearing. Now he carried himself with quiet humility, earning the respect of his peers rather than their envy. His fellow students noticed the change and began asking him for advice. Wei was happy to share what he had learned from Chuck, emphasizing the importance of patience, focus, and respect. One afternoon, as Wei was helping a younger student practice his kicks, Eric Dawson walked into the dojo. Eric had stayed in touch with Wei since their initial meeting, checking in periodically to see how things were going. "How's it going, kid?" he asked, leaning against the wall. Wei smiled. "Good," he said. "Better than ever, actually." Eric nodded approvingly. "You've come a long way. Chuck was right. You're a quick learner." Wei's expression softened. "I owe him everything," he said. "He didn't just teach me martial arts. He taught me how to be a better person." Eric chuckled. "That's Chuck for you. Always leading by example." The two men chatted for a while before Eric brought up something unexpected. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "There's a tournament coming up in Los Angeles. Some of the top martial artists in the country will be there. I think you should enter." Wei raised an eyebrow. "Me? Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Eric replied. "You've got the skills now, and more importantly, you've got the mindset. This could be a great opportunity for you to test yourself against some of the best fighters out there." Wei hesitated. Competing in a high-profile tournament was a big step, especially given his past failures. But deep down, he knew Eric was right. If he wanted to continue growing as a martial artist, he needed to push himself further. "All right," he said finally, "I'll do it." In the weeks leading up to the tournament, Wei trained harder than ever. He worked closely with Chuck, who flew in from Texas to help him prepare. Together they refined Wei's techniques, focusing on strategy and mental toughness. Chuck reminded Wei that winning wasn't the goal. The real victory lay in giving his best effort and respecting his opponents. Meanwhile, Laura completed her article and submitted it to her editor. Titled, "From Arrogance to Artistry, The Making of a Martial Artist." The piece captured Wei's journey in vivid detail. It highlighted his early struggles, his humbling encounter with Chuck Norris, and his eventual transformation into a disciplined and respectful fighter. The article was published in a popular magazine and quickly gained traction online, sparking widespread interest in Wei's story. When the day of the tournament arrived, Wei felt a mix. The day of the tournament finally arrived, and Wei Zhang felt a mix of excitement and nerves as he stepped into the large sports arena in Los Angeles. The event was being held in a massive indoor stadium, with rows of seats filled with spectators, eager to watch some of the best martial artists in the country compete. Bright lights illuminated the central ring, where fighters would face off one by one. Posters advertising the tournament hung on the walls, showcasing famous names alongside lesser-known competitors like Wei. Wei had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, he couldn't help feeling a little overwhelmed. He glanced around at the other participants warming up near their corners of the arena. Some looked calm and focused, while others seemed tense and restless. Wei took a deep breath, reminding himself of what Chuck Norris had taught him. Stay grounded. Focus on your breathing. Trust your training. As he stretched and practiced his footwork, Laura Bennett appeared beside him. She had come to cover the tournament for her magazine, and she wanted to check in with Wei before the matches began. "How are you feeling?" she asked, holding her notebook and pen. "Nervous," Wei admitted with a small laugh. "But also excited. This is my chance to see how far I've come." Laura smiled encouragingly. "You've already proven yourself. Just focus on doing your best." Wei nodded, grateful for her support. He knew she was right. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about showing respect for the art and giving everything he had. Soon the announcer called the first round of matches to begin. Wei's name was scheduled later in the lineup, so he had time to observe the other fighters. Each match was intense, with competitors showcasing a variety of styles, from traditional karate to modern mixed martial arts. Wei watched closely, analyzing their techniques and strategies. He noticed how some fighters relied on brute strength, while others used speed and precision to outmaneuver their opponents. When it was finally Wei's turn to step into the ring, his heart raced. His opponent was a tall, muscular man named Ryan Carter, known for his powerful punches and aggressive style. As they bowed to each other and took their positions, Wei reminded himself to stay calm. "Control your movements," Chuck's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't rush. Be patient." The match started with Ryan charging forward, throwing a series of quick jabs aimed at Wei's chest. Wei dodged them easily, using his agility to stay out of reach. When Ryan paused to regain his balance, Wei countered with a swift kick to his side. The crowd gasped as Ryan stumbled backward, clearly surprised by Wei's speed. Ryan recovered quickly, however, and came back with even more force. He launched a spinning back kick that caught Wei off guard, sending him sprawling onto the mat. Pain shot through Wei's shoulder as he hit the ground, but he forced himself to get up immediately. The referee signaled for the fight to continue, and Wei returned to his stance, determined not to let one mistake define the match. This time, Wei adjusted his strategy. Instead of trying to match Ryan's power, he focused on staying light on his feet and finding openings in his opponent's defense. Every time Ryan attacked, Wei sidestepped or blocked, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Finally, when Ryan overextended on a punch, Wei saw his chance. He delivered a precise kick to Ryan's knee, followed by a sharp elbow strike to his ribs. Ryan fell to the mat and the referee counted him out. The crowd erupted into cheers as Wei raised his hands in victory. It wasn't just the win that made him proud, it was knowing that he had stayed true to the principles Chuck had taught him. Respect, discipline, and control had carried him through. After the tournament, Wei's performance earned him recognition not only from the audience, but also from fellow martial artists. Many approached him afterward to congratulate him on his skill and composure during the matches. One of these admirers was Laura, who pulled Wei aside for another interview. "That was incredible," she said, jotting down notes. "What was going through your mind during the match?" Wei thought for a moment before answering. "Honestly, I was thinking about everything Chuck taught me, how to stay calm, how to read my opponent, and how to use my strengths wisely. I didn't care about winning. I just wanted to do my best." Laura nodded, impressed by his maturity. "It shows. You've really grown since we first met." Wei smiled. "I owe it all to Chuck. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today." A few weeks later, Wei traveled back to Texas to visit Chuck Norris at his home gym. He wanted to thank him personally for everything he had done. When he arrived, Chuck greeted him warmly, inviting him inside. The two men sat together on the porch, sipping tea as they talked about the tournament and Wei's future plans. "You did well," Chuck said, his tone filled with pride. "But remember, this is just the beginning. There's always more to learn." Wei nodded. "I know, and I want to keep learning. That's why I've decided to start teaching." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "Teaching?" "Yes. Wei replied. I want to open my own dojo in San Francisco, a place where I can pass on what you've taught me, not just the techniques, but the values too. Humility, respect, discipline. Chuck smiled. That's a noble goal. Martial arts isn't just about fighting, it's about shaping lives. If you can inspire others the way I inspired you, then you'll have truly succeeded. Wei felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, Chuck, for everything. Months passed and Wei kept his promise. With the help of Eric Dawson and Laura Bennett, who wrote articles promoting his new venture, Wei opened a modest dojo in San Francisco. He called it Harmony Martial Arts, reflecting the balance between Chinese Kung Fu and the lessons he had learned from Chuck Norris. Students of all ages and backgrounds flocked to the dojo, drawn by Wei's reputation and his unique approach to teaching. One evening, after a long day of classes, Wei stood outside the dojo watching his students practice. They moved with confidence and purpose, embodying the same values Wei had worked so hard to embrace. Among them was a young boy named Alex, whose enthusiasm reminded Wei of himself at that age. Alex struggled with coordination, but he never gave up, always pushing himself to improve. As Wei watched, Laura approached him. She had become a close friend over the months, often visiting the dojo to document its growth. Looks like you're making quite an impact, she said with a smile. Wei nodded. It feels good to give back, to show people that martial arts is about more than just winning fights. Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. You've come a long way, Wei. From mocking Chuck Norris to becoming someone who inspires others. You should be proud. Wei chuckled softly. Yeah, I guess I have. And it's all thanks to him. Years later, Wei's dojo became one of the most respected martial arts schools in the city. Students praised not only his skill, but also his kindness and humility. Laura published several follow-up articles about Wei's journey, inspiring countless readers around the world. Meanwhile, Chuck Norris continued to live quietly in Texas, occasionally visiting Wei to offer guidance and share stories. One day, as Wei prepared for another class, he received a letter from Chuck. Inside was a simple note. True strength lies not in defeating others but in lifting them up. Keep teaching, my friend. Wei held the note close to his heart, smiling as he stepped onto the mat to begin the lesson. He knew that his journey was far from over, but that was exactly what made it so meaningful. Years had passed since Wei Jiang opened Harmony Martial Arts, and the dojo had grown into something far greater than he ever imagined. What started as a small space with a handful of students had become a thriving community, attracting people from all walks of life. The walls of the dojo were now adorned with photos of past events, trophies from tournaments, and handwritten notes from students thanking Wei for changing their lives. But for Wei, the true measure of success wasn't in the accolades, it was in the impact he had on others. Wei's teaching style reflected everything he had learned from Chuck Norris. He emphasized discipline, respect, and humility above all else. His classes weren't just about learning how to fight, they were about building character and finding balance. Parents praised Wei for helping their children gain confidence, while adults spoke of how his lessons had helped them deal with stress and challenges outside the dojo. One student, Alex, the same boy who had struggled with coordination years earlier, had grown into a skilled martial artist and even competed in national tournaments. Seeing Alex succeed filled Wei with pride, knowing that he had played a role in shaping the young man's future. Despite his busy schedule, Wei never lost touch with Chuck Norris. They exchanged letters regularly, sharing updates and stories about their lives. Chuck often sent words of encouragement, reminding Wei to stay grounded and continue spreading the values of martial arts. Occasionally, Chuck would visit San Francisco, drawing large crowds to the dojo. These visits were always special occasions, not only because of Chuck's presence, but also because they reinforced the bond between teacher and student. One day, Laura Bennett arrived at the dojo with exciting news. She had been working on a book about Wei's journey, chronicling his transformation from an arrogant young fighter to a respected instructor. Titled, From Arrogance to Artistry, The Journey of a Martial Artist. The book combined interviews, photographs, and personal reflections to paint a vivid picture of Wei's growth. Laura handed him an advance copy, her eyes shining with excitement. "I think this will inspire a lot of people," she said. Wei flipped through the pages, feeling a mix of emotions. The book captured moments he had almost forgotten. His early struggles, his humbling encounter with Chuck, and the countless hours of training that followed. It also included quotes from his students, many of whom credited him with helping them overcome obstacles in their own lives. "This is amazing," Wei said, looking up at Laura. "Thank you for telling my story." Laura smiled. "It's not just your story. It's a story about resilience, humility, and the power of mentorship. I hope it encourages others to embrace change and seek guidance when they need it." As the book gained popularity, Wei found himself invited to speak at conferences and events across the country. At first, he felt nervous about stepping into the spotlight again, but he soon realized that these opportunities allowed him to share important lessons with a wider audience. In his talks, he emphasized the importance of lifelong learning and self-improvement. "No matter where you are in life," he would say, "there's always room to grow. Be open to feedback and don't be afraid to ask for help." During one of these speaking engagements, Wei traveled to Austin, Texas to participate in a panel discussion about martial arts and its role in modern society. The event was held at a local university, and Chuck Norris was among the speakers. When Wei saw Chuck walk onto the stage, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Without Chuck's guidance, none of this would have been possible. After the panel, Wei and Chuck sat together backstage, reminiscing about old times. "You've done incredible work," Chuck said, patting Wei on the shoulder. "Your dojo is proof that martial arts can change lives." Wei shook his head modestly. "I couldn't have done it without you. You taught me everything." Chuck chuckled. "I may have shown you the path, but you're the one who walked it. Never forget that." The two men spent the rest of the evening talking about their shared passion for martial arts and the future of the discipline. They agreed that while techniques and styles might evolve, the core principles, respect, discipline, and perseverance, would always remain the same. Back in San Francisco, Wei continued expanding his efforts beyond the dojo. He partnered with local schools and community centers to offer free martial arts classes for underprivileged youth. Many of these children faced difficult circumstances, and Wei believed that martial arts could provide them with structure, confidence, and a sense of belonging. One of his most dedicated students was a teenage girl named Mia, whose family had recently moved to the city. Mia had been shy and withdrawn when she first joined the program, but over time she blossomed into a confident and determined young woman. Watching her progress reminded Wei of his own journey and reinforced his belief in the transformative power of martial arts. In addition to his work with youth, Wei also organized workshops for adults, focusing on mindfulness and stress management. Drawing from both Chinese philosophy and Chuck's teachings, he taught participants how to cultivate inner peace and resilience. These workshops became incredibly popular, attracting professionals, parents, and retirees alike. For Wei, seeing people apply these lessons to their daily lives was deeply rewarding. One evening after a long day of teaching, Wei sat alone in the dojo, reflecting on how far he had come. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He thought about the arrogant young man he used to be, the one who mocked Chuck Norris and dismissed other fighting styles. That version of himself seemed like a stranger now. Wei had learned that true strength wasn't about proving superiority. It was about lifting others up and creating a positive impact. As he prepared to leave, Wei noticed a framed photo hanging on the wall. It was a picture of him and Chuck taken during one of their training sessions in Texas. Both men were smiling, their expressions radiating mutual respect and admiration. Wei stared at the photo for a moment, then bowed slightly, silently thanking Chuck for everything he had done. The next morning, Wei received a letter from Chuck. Inside was a simple message. "Legacy isn't built on titles or trophies. It's built on the lives you touch and the values you pass on. Keep inspiring, my friend." Tears welled up in Wei's eyes as he read the note. He knew that Chuck was right. Legacy wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making a difference. And as long as he continued teaching and sharing the lessons he had learned, his legacy would live on. Years later, Wei stood in front of a new group of students, ready to begin another class. His hair had turned gray, and lines marked his face, but his spirit remained as strong as ever. As he led the students through warm-up exercises, he thought about the generations of martial artists he had influenced. Some had gone on to open their own dojos, while others had applied the principles of martial arts to different fields. Each of them carried a piece of Wei's teachings with them, spreading the values of respect, discipline, and humility wherever they went. At the end of the class, Wei gathered the students around him. "Remember," he said, his voice steady and warm, "martial arts isn't just about fighting. It's about becoming the best version of yourself. Respect others, stay humble, and never stop learning." The students nodded, their faces filled with determination. We smiled, knowing that the cycle of mentorship would continue. Just as Chuck had inspired him, he hoped to inspire others, to create a ripple effect of positivity and growth. As the students bowed and left the dojo, Wei stayed behind watching them go. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had stayed true to the values he cherished. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. Wei took a deep breath, savoring the moment. His journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been profoundly meaningful. And as he locked up the dojo for the night, he knew that the lessons he had learned and taught would endure for generations to come.